Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we have 10 absolutely disturbing Let's Not Meet stories. And I'm going to be fully honest with you. These stories can get pretty raw and are definitely 100% not for the faint of heart. And I don't recommend listening to them if you're triggered very easily. Extreme caution is advised from this point. But if you're ready, it's time to get comfortable and let the true darkness take control. Back in my early 20s, I moved to Melbourne to go to university. Because of some of my dodgy mates I knew from outside of my uni, I somehow wound up as a go-to guy for drugs with my classmates. I hated the reputation, but maybe felt a little bit cooler at the same time. Ecstasy and speed mostly. I was at the bottom of the drug dealer food chain, the type of idiot who jacks the price up $10 a pill so he can make enough to drink and party. I had no guilt ripping these people off. They were mostly rich kids who lived with their parents and didn't have a job to support them through uni. Dealing them drugs was so easy and non-threatening. A few years after I finished uni, I was working an office job that was boring and paid peanuts. By now, my friends and I had pretty much grown out of the desire to take drugs on weekends. Dinner parties with good friends, good wine and good conversation was more of our idea of fun. My drug dealing days had well and truly finished, or so I thought. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I just got home from a draining day at work and was exhausted and in a bad mood. I plonked myself on the couch and stared at the ceiling, trying to muster up the energy to get up and shower before bed. My phone starts flashing and vibrating on the coffee table next to me. I looked at the caller ID, and it was T-Bone, the nickname I had for a guy who I met at a festival years ago and ended up spending a bit of time with here and there. He was a huge, friendly, weed-smoking, acid-tripping hipster with an impressive beard. I hadn't spoken to this guy in well over a year, so when I saw his caller ID on my phone, I immediately thought, he needs drugs. I answered and we exchanged some pleasantries, and then I could hear the tone of his voice changing to that awkward, "Hey, could I ask you a favor?" tone. He wanted drugs, and lots of them, $2,000 worth to be precise. When I asked him what specifically he wanted, he just said as many eckies and bags of speed as that can get. This was way outside my comfort zone. Even when I was dealing back in uni, 10 pills was usually the maximum I would offer at any one time. It was late, I was tired, but I was also broke, and figured that I could clear an easy $500 after purchasing from one of my guys I used to buy from. Something which T-Bone didn't need to know. I told T-Bone that I would call him back and see what I could do. To my surprise, the first person I called was Stover. He would be able to help me out, and he was only a 5-minute drive away. We discussed the terms and conditions which seemed reasonable. 60 E's and 3 grams of speed for $1,500. I called T-Bone, and he was happy to part with his $2,000 for this amount. I met Stover out of his luxurious apartment building. We had a quick chat, and he joked about wanting to meet the guy I'm selling to. We shook hands, and I was on my way to T-Bone. I asked T-Bone where he wanted to meet, and he told me where he was. I Google mapped the address, and it was a 45-minute drive from me. Had I known he was this far, I wouldn't have agreed to sell him anything, but I couldn't back out now. The address he gave me was in what is probably the worst neighbourhood in Australia, known for its violent crimes, murder, and of course drug dealing. Irony. For anyone hearing this outside of Australia, they certainly don't know this run-down little hellhole in the tourist brochures. I also won't mention the name of the place because I don't wish to offend anyone who might happen to live there. I started the journey. I now had plenty of time to think about how stupid I am. I had a ridiculously illegal amount of drugs on me, driving out to the roughest neighborhoods in the country. After ages of sitting on the freeway, I took the exit and was approaching my destination. At this point, I was so tired that I was in almost a dreamlike state. Every set of lights I pulled up to, people in cars next to me would give me greasy looks, trying to act hard and start confrontations. I pulled into the street where the house was. My phone chimed the familiar, "Your destination is on the left." Thanks, phone. The street was so dark because the street lights were out, and there was cloud cover and no moon. I couldn't see anything. The houses in this street looked dilapidated and abandoned. This didn't feel right. The house that T-Bone said he was at had boarded up front windows with terrible graffiti tags on them, and there weren't any lights on. I called T-Bone and got no answer. I redialed and thought it was about to ring out when he picked up. "Hey T-Bone, I'm out front." "Oh, cool. Come on in." "No, come out to the car." "Hang on a sec," he said and then hung up. I was thinking, crap, I hardly know this guy. He's been to a few parties I went to, we hung out, but I didn't know anything about him. I saw him emerge from the side of the house, pushing through bushes that blocked the pathway. I was the only car parked on the street. He saw me and gestured for me to come over. I had no idea who he was with, so I thought it was time to get into character. I took my jacket off so I was only wearing a white singlet and put my filthy black trucker cap on that I kept in the glove box. I was hoping this would give me a look that said, "Don't mess with me." My friends often joke about how I look tougher than I am. I have some football and kickboxing-induced facial scars combined with a pretty big physique from smashing weights for years. I was big enough and scary-looking enough to be intimidating, but truth be known, I'm really a marshmallow who avoids confrontations. I shook hands with T-Bone in the front yard of this place, and felt at ease when he gave me a happy greeting and thanked me for coming out all this way. He told me to follow him, and we went through the bushes around the back of this place. I could hear music, sounds like they were pumping dubstep through crappy distorting speakers. I could hear a few people's voices and I could smell cigarette smoke. T-Bone ripped the back door open and the smell and sound hit me harder. I've been to some nasty house parties, but this was horrific. There were 3 of them in the kitchen. There was a flashlight attached by a string to the 12-foot ceiling, swinging back and forth in a slow pendulum style. It was the only lighting. The swinging light made it difficult to see the people in the kitchen, but with each sway I would catch a glimpse of their faces. They were absolute toothless junkies, all shirtless, skinny, with bad tattoos. We entered the kitchen and one of them closed the door behind us and stood in front of it, arms folded, as if he were guarding it. One of them came forward and told me his name was Jay. Not like he was introducing himself, it was more of a statement. His face looked like he'd been on meth for years. He sized me up and then looked at T-Bone and said, "I thought you said he was small." T-Bone looked at him in total shock. As Jay turned to T-Bone, the flashlight swung past and I noticed he was holding a big screwdriver behind his back. Now I realized what was happening, and I felt like an idiot. I've walked into an ambush. Get a guy with a crap load of drugs to come around and rob him. Jay turned back to me. He was about 6 feet away from me and he showed me the screwdriver and said, "What have you got for me?" with a big front tooth missing smile. The fact I was so tired and pissed off kind of worked for me because I didn't show that I was actually bricking it. I squared up to him and said in a no-nonsense tone, "Give me all the cash and I'll show you." To which Jay replied, "Nah, can't. Didn't T-Bone tell ya? These were on the tick, mate." On the tick, meaning I'll pay you later, or never in this case. I looked at T-Bone, who looked back at me and shook his head and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Jay looked at me with such hatred, it looked as though he was in pain. "Give us your gear." It wasn't so dark in this hellhole. He could have easily seen over my inflated pockets, where I'd stashed everything. I looked at the guy in front of the door, and as soon as our eyes met, he put his arm over the door handle, confirming that he wasn't going to let me leave. We all stood there trading glances. The swinging light made everyone's shadows look like they were moving. Jay didn't like this. T-Bone broke the silence and said, "Jay, chill out. I'll get the money." And he left to the kitchen. I thought he was going to bail on me. Who has 2K cash just lying around? Jay slowly came towards me, pointing the screwdriver at me. He said in a raspy, matter-of-fact tone, "I'll kill ya. I'll do the time. Just try me." "That's cute," I reply. Then the painful anger came back to his face. I've never seen anything like it. I slowly put my feet into a fighting stance to prepare myself for what was about to happen. T-Bone walked back in and said, "Here's the cash," which briefly diffused the situation. I did a quick count. 1,700. Close enough. I threw the envelope of gear to Jay and the door guard moved and I got the hell out of there. T-Bone followed me and tried to give me an apology. "Mate, I had no idea that was going to happen. I'm so sorry." I just said, "You owe me $300 and drove away. I never got the extra 300 and I never dealt drugs again. I also thankfully never met Jay again. I met Abby on the first day of 2nd grade. I saw her snapping her fingers on the bus seat next to mine. I couldn't snap my fingers, so I was intrigued, and I sat there with her so she could teach me. To this day, I can still only snap my fingers on the hand that she taught me. Our friendship was never like the ones they show in movies. Abby had a pretty hard home life and eventually fell in with the wrong crowd. She was into drugs, alcohol and parties, while I was into books, studying and animals. Still, I felt like it was my job to save her from it. She was, after all, my best friend. The summer before senior year, I was 17 and feeling rebellious. I'd stay more often at Abby's house where her mum would let us drink in a more safe environment, but then Abby met a guy and started dating him. Ryan. He creeped me out. He was about 5 years our senior and just off. One day, Abby suggested that we go meet up with Ryan and his friend Kyle. It turned out that Kyle was the local drug dealer. I wasn't overly comfortable with this, but I wanted to impress Abby and definitely didn't want to leave her alone with them. They started smoking pot, and eventually I joined them. The hot air combined with the alcohol we'd already consumed made me feel sick, and Abby took me outside to cool off, and I laid down on the lawn. I will admit it, I'm a total lightweight. Pretty soon the guys come out to check on us, and I could hear them laughing and saying something, but honestly in that moment I didn't care. Ryan took us home, and the next morning Abby had told me that my leggings had been sheer, and the guy had been talking about the show I had put on for them. For a while, I refused to be around Ryan or Kyle. They were weird, I didn't like them, and they made me feel super uncomfortable. But I was young and dumb, and going through some tough stuff. When Abby suggested I come round again, even though Ryan was there, I went anyway. Right after I got there, Ryan started talking about how much Kyle liked me. Not wanting to be rude, I said that was flattering, but that I wasn't interested. Abby suggested to cheer me up that we go to Ryan's house and have some drinks. At this point, even Abby's mum didn't like Ryan being around. I should have known it was a red flag if even she didn't like him. Abby said that they'd have a cute guy come over for me, so I was placated. We get there, start drinking, and Ryle said Kyle was coming over for a moment to liven up the party. I pulled Abby aside and told her how uncomfortable I was with that, but she assured me that he wouldn't stick around long and that my guy would be there soon. Kyle arrives and I'm already smashed. They start smoking and I couldn't stand the smell, so I tell Abby I'm going to lay down for a bit and to come get me when my guy gets here. As I said, I was drunk. I don't hold my alcohol well and barely drink to this day. The next thing I remember, I'm waking up, naked in bed, Kyle is leaning over me with his member in hand. I don't know why, but at that moment I laughed. I guess I just didn't know how to process the information, or perhaps the irony of the situation that I was in. I was depressed that summer due to the fact that I was coming to terms with being sexually abused as a child, and it's ironic that in trying to get over it, it was happening again. My mind works in weird ways. Kyle sits back on his haunches, bewildered, and I scurry out the room to find Abby and tell her what happened. Abby and Ryan were right outside the door and had heard me giggle. As soon as I start freaking out, Abby and Ryan start berating me for laughing at Kyle. I couldn't explain why I'd done it, and I don't even have a rational reason now. Both Abby and Ryan said that after I had laid down for a while, I'd come back in and started making passes at Kyle, so we'd gone back to the room. Being naive and 17, I believed Abby. But I apologized to Kyle, who was now irate, and told him I just wasn't comfortable, and made Abby take me home, and I stopped hanging out with them. Something about the situation just didn't sit right with me. That fall, when school started, a mutual friend came up to me, and what she told me will haunt me for the rest of my life. The first time I had met Kyle, and he had seen the show I put on, he told Ryan and Abby that if he could get me to sleep with him, he would give them free drugs. When Abby realized I wouldn't sleep with Kyle of my own free will, she decided to get me drunk enough to not know better. She was my best friend. I had known her for a decade. Last I heard of Abby, she was in and out of the psych ward. Ryan was abusing her, and he made her drop out of college to support his habits. I don't know what became of Kyle, but honestly, I don't want to know. So Ryan, Abby and Kyle, let's not meet again. My friend Kari is a very quiet girl. She's extremely nice, but very introverted and reserved. I went to a school with her previous to this one, and we tried to get her involved in events, but she always turned us down and went home to hang out with her grandmother, even in university. She is still expected to call home every night to show that she's safe and in her dorm room. One day, Kari had gotten friendly one lecture with a girl who sat beside her, Danielle. Since they both lived on residence, they walked home together and decided to stop in the dining hall for a chat and some food. Everything was normal until Danielle steered the topic into some rather odd conversation. First, she began telling her how she had been in a mental health facility for trying to kill someone in high school. She began telling my friend that when she first arrived in this city, she traveled downtown at night, hoping to find an intoxicated homeless person that she would be able to overpower and kill. She told my friend of different ways to disembowel cats and offered to show her how to do it. She told my friend of how she wanted to kill different roommates since she first arrived on res, but was too worried she would be caught. She also admitted that the only reason she was taking law and forensics was to learn how to commit crime better. Kari, already shy and timid around normal people, quickly excused herself and left. 5 minutes later, their encounter ended, and I got a Facebook message telling me the entire situation and asking what she should do. I advised her she tell her professor, which she did. Both of us thought the girl needed help, but we assumed that she was probably lying or at least exaggerating in order to get attention. A few days later, I got another message from Kari telling me about the events that followed. After Kari told the professor, she was called in the next day by police. The school took the threats and claims very seriously, but the police told her not to worry. They also thought she was exaggerating or lying, but told her they were going to take her in that night for an evaluation. Not long after, Kari was told that Danielle would not be coming back to the residence. She had been admitted to a facility and was banned from school. A few months later, we were informed of the charges that were being laid against Danielle: animal cruelty, animal neglect, and possession of indecent images of underage minors. They'd found videos of her mutilating animals. With my own research, I found pages of her online discussing how she liked necrophilia, etc. She proudly boasted about all her fetishes and claimed online that she had ended lives before. It turns out she had indeed been in care because she had tried to end someone's life, and had been kept in confinement since she had been removed from school as she was considered a danger to staff and other residents. On res, her roommates had claimed that she was up all night and rarely left her room. They also reported a strange smell coming from it, and that she was a bit weird. In her room, the police also found a kit that she was preparing. They found written fantasies about breaking and entering, all kinds of sexual assault, including with a minor, and believed the kit was being prepared for when she would finally go and live out the fantasies. They also told Kari that they believed she admitted all of this to her within an hour of meeting her, because she had somehow thought she had found someone with similar interests and was looking to partner with her. Last I heard, she pleaded guilty, but her sentencing was postponed as they was doing further psychiatric evaluations on her. Fun times. I forgot to mention one thing, but get this, guys. She's a Romanian orphan. No joke. I'm a 33-year-old female. As a 90s kid growing up in Eastern Europe, my childhood was full of stories, some of which cringeworthy, some hilarious, but still managed to give me chills, especially now that I fully realized the potential harm I was facing back then. I had several instances where I got pretty close to being in real danger, but here I've picked only the two most prominent ones, because I don't want to bore you with a long post, and because they are imprinted in my mind, and weirdly very vivid in every detail. I was 10 years old. It was a hot summer day in noon. I was allowed to play in front of my apartment building with other kids, but I had to always stare where my mum could peek from the window and see me. On this day, maybe because it was noon and most of the other children were still having lunch or a nap, on the playground was just me and an 8-year-old boy, drawing with chalk on the ground. There weren't any people on the streets, but I remember noticing a man in his 20s walking past us. I didn't pay much attention to him at first, until I noticed that he started to stop and turned to look at us a few times, but then he went away, so I kept drawing. Some time passed, and I suddenly saw a pair of male shoes standing next to where I was crouched down, and when I looked up, I saw it was the same man. He looked around, and then asked the boy to go a little further away because he wanted to tell me a secret. The boy obliged, and I was left alone with this stranger. I remember he was staring at me. Even though he was smiling, there was some undercurrent tension in his whole demeanor, which made me feel a bit uneasy. He leaned down, propping his hands on his knees. I don't recall exactly what he said at first because I was looking around to see if anyone I knew was around, but then he asked me if I liked kittens. My eyes lit up, and I immediately perked, saying yes, and then he said he knew where a mother cat with her litter of kittens was, and asked if I wanted to go see them. I immediately stood up, my uneasiness and all this stranger danger warnings immediately dissolving at the prospect of kittens, as my mum didn't allow pets at home. He told me to follow him, and I did, him walking in front of me and me behind, until I saw that he was actually going towards one of the 4 entrances of the apartment building. Back then, the front doors of those buildings weren't locked, and neither were the entrances to the basement area, which were on the inside next to the main door. He entered the building and started to descend down the staircase leading to the basement area, and that's when some form of self-preservation instinct started to kick in and made me hesitate at the doorstep. He was already on the last step down to the basement when he turned to check if I was following, and beckoned me in a cheerful, "Come on, hurry up." I took a few more hesitant steps in, and he continued further into the basement corridor where it was dark, humid, and a putrid smell of mold lingered. I could see half of him. The rest of him was hidden behind the corner of the wall, but then I heard a metal click sound. I was starting to descend down the steps. I know, I cringe at my own stupidity when I remember it too. When he peeked again, half of him was still hidden from sight, but the visible half revealed his belt buckle dangling unbuckled, and then he came out a little more and his hand moved, drawing my eyes down when I saw it. Yeah, you guessed it, his pants were unzipped, and he looked at me and I still remember the expression in his eyes. I wanted to scream, but I was honestly so shocked. I had a deer in the headlights moment, and before he took a step up towards me, I finally felt the sudden adrenaline rush kicking in. One moment I was standing frozen, the next I was running out of there at the speed of light. I didn't even turn to see if he was following. All I knew was that I had to get away. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, to which there were 2 entrances from this one, just in time to bump into every worried mum who was putting her shoes on to get out to look for me. Worried sick because apparently the last time she peeked through the window, she didn't see me and shouted my name a few times and got no answer. She had an unsettling feeling that something was wrong. She asked me what happened, and at first I didn't tell her because I was shamed and scared that she would get even angrier if she found out I was even talking to a stranger, let alone about to follow him. I started feeling anxious after that, and eventually admitted to what happened to my mum. Needless to say, I was given an earful of lectures, but wasn't allowed to play outside without supervision until years later. The second prominent story took place when I was 12. And thinking back now, compared to today's 12-year-olds being so outspoken and street smart, I was still a clueless kid. I remember I was feeling very insecure and self-conscious at the time, because puberty had hit as if overnight, and my previous scrawny little body was beginning to form curves, which also prompted unwanted attention from teenage boys, and even older men, at the age of my father, taking notice of me when I walked past them. It was during the spring vacation when my mum, my aunt, and my 13-year-old male cousin and I went to the amusement park in my city. My cousin was riding a bumper car, and I was sitting on a bench with my mum and aunt, when I spotted a man setting a big tin pot at the alley leading to the park. I immediately started pleading with my mum to give me money, because I knew what he was selling: boiled corn on the cob. Now keep in mind that back then nobody seemed to care about checking health and sanitary permissions of street vendors, and it was very common to see little ice cream stands and old ladies sitting on chairs with a pot next to them, selling boiled corn on the cob or cotton candy. My mum sent me to buy 4 of them, 1 for each of us, and I headed towards the man, my mouth already watering. When I approached him and ordered, however, I noticed that he hesitated and gave me a very unsettling once over from head to toe, and then without even opening the pot to check, declared there won't be enough corn in there. I thought that was weird, considering I had just spotted him coming, which logically was supposed to mean he had a pot full of corn, but didn't say anything because I was shy and awkward, and it had never even occurred to me to question an adult like that, especially a stranger. He quickly added that his car was parked at the nearby parking lot, which was right behind the alley leading to the amusement park, and told me that if I wanted it, I should follow him to retrieve another spare pot from his trunk. I looked back at the park and thought that the parking lot was still close enough and shouldn't be a problem. So relieved that I will, after all, get my corn, I followed him. He picked the pot and started carrying it towards the car, with me walking a few steps behind, and he was just opening the trunk to put the pot inside when 2 things happened spontaneously. My hand was abruptly grabbed by my aunt, who shook me and started questioning my sanity for walking away with a stranger, and shouting at the man for being crazy to suggest to a child to follow them to the car, and I caught a glimpse of the trunk, and inside was no other pot of corn, but the one he just put inside. Now at that point I was still confused, and frankly I'm ashamed to admit I was even a little annoyed at my aunt for overreacting, because I still wanted my corn and didn't understand what the big deal was until my train of thought was interrupted. What happened next still makes the hairs on my neck stand on end. Instead of clarifying the situation, given any semi-reasonable explanation or attempting to respond in any way, the man suddenly rushed to close the trunk, ran to his car, and then took off in such a hurry that the tires made those screeching noises from the rapid acceleration. My aunt and I stood there dumbfounded, and it suddenly dawned on us that what appeared to be an innocent yet cautionary situation was actually a very real potential taking attempt, because if there had ever been any reasonable doubt before as to why the man would lure a 12-year-old girl alone towards his car, his following reaction of fleeing the scene had left no room for it. My aunt visited us recently, and that instance was brought up somehow. So she said that she still remembers how what drew her attention at first was the fact that the man was unusually dressed up for a street vendor, and so she was watching closely with a weird gut feeling at first. When she saw that he was taking me towards the parking lot, she sprinted into action. Thank God my aunt, being a PE teacher and a mother of a very wild boy, was wearing sneakers and was always prepared to jump into action. I'm not one to ever pass up an opportunity for a good deal on some high-grade cannabis, so when I received a text from a friend of mine telling me that he could sell me a 1/4 of an ounce of some good stuff for $25, I jumped at the chance. He led me on all day, telling me that he would be dropping it off in the evening. Evening came, and so did the text saying he'd drop by later that night. And finally at 11:30, I received a text sent with a ping of anxiety running through me. "Sup man, I'm headed out of town for the night. Your sack is in the garage under the ladder." I knew exactly what this entailed. I was to walk the 5 blocks to his old residence, a mutual friend's home where he lived in a loft in the garage, slip in unnoticed by the neighbors, search until I found it, leave the money and be on my merry way. Simple, right? Wrong. The walk started off sketchy enough, with the lone street light on the block going out as I left, plunging me into this unusual pseudo-darkness. I walked along in silence, the only sound coming from the highway some distance away. I'd walked this way before, even at this hour, but I couldn't shake the anticipation in my gut. I reached the house, which I must say is absolutely terrifying at night. Something didn't seem right. My friend is very strict with his bedtimes. This meant that the house was dark at exactly 10 p.m. every night. Tonight, though, there was a glow coming from the first door. This could have been a number of things. Maybe he had other friends over, brought a girl home, or getting a late-night snack. I quickly assured myself as I stepped through the door into a pitch-black garage. I closed the door behind me and got to searching. The garage is separated into an upstairs and downstairs to save space. Upstairs there is a washer and dryer, while downstairs was a box storage that led under the stairs, forming a cave-like lair. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like a robbery simulator, rummaging through my friend's garage unannounced, looking for drugs. My heart began to race at the thought. It really started racing though, when I heard the heavy footsteps stomping their way towards the inside garage. I had kicked a paint can by accident, and they probably heard it. Now my first instinct told me that I should make myself known. It was my friend's place after all. He probably even knew about the whole deal. We laugh. He'd point where it was, and I'd be on my merry way. That's when I realized something. My friend does not own a single pair of boots. In a split instant, I had ducked down under the floorboards behind some boxes. The door outside was quite far away, the footsteps quickly approaching, so escape was not an option. I had to hide. I was so confused. It felt like I was in a slasher movie, hand over my mouth to keep from hyperventilating and everything. I listened as the door slammed open, the footsteps creaking slowly along the floorboards just inches to my right. They paced around the garage for what seemed like ages, grunting and taking heavy, labored breaths. They stopped at the top of the stairs, never making their way down though. Soon enough, they made their way back to the house, slamming on the door behind them. As soon as the door clicked, I bolted. I didn't stop running until I was back home, tucked away in my bed. Every single light in the house on for the rest of the night. I wasn't about to get the cops involved with the situation, lest they go searching and get my friend in trouble. So I simply sent him a text message and went to sleep. I awoke to 2 texts in the morning. The first was a message from my dealer friend asking if I was alright. The second was a text from the friend who owned the house telling me he got stuck at a friend's house overnight. I was so confused. Later that day, the friend with the house sent me a news link over Facebook with no caption. It was a news report about a burglary/murder that took place on my friend's street. 2 houses had already been confirmed as being broken into in the middle of the night. The first was the home of an injured veteran. He was found in his bedroom with a 9mm slug lodged in his head. All the valuables in his house gone. The second was my friend's house. I'll just start this off by saying that my dad is a character. All of my friends loved him growing up because he could entertain you just by talking to him. This attitude is what initially led me to question the legitimacy of this story for a long time. But now that I'm a bit older, I could tell this one cuts deep every time we make him tell it. Usually he talks in a very upbeat, active tone, but when my brothers and I first heard him tell this story, or talk about it in general, his tone completely changes. It's as if all the color just rushes from his face. It's obvious he doesn't enjoy talking about it. Okay, now to the story. He was about 18 at the time. From pictures he seemed like an athletic, approachable teen who was living in the Gary/Whitting area of northwest Indiana. Sometime late in the evening, my dad, who's been a smoker for roughly 50 years of his life, decides to hitchhike to his local convenience store. He has a knack for talking about places or events as if he were there, an odd thing to do considering the shop was only a couple of miles away from his house. Eventually, a truck pulls to the side of the road. It was a baby blue pickup truck to be exact. Apparently there were 2 men in the truck, probably both in their 40s or so. Pretty normal looking to him. He said that the driver was a bit burly and sort of looked like Jackie Gleason. The truck was only a 3-seater, so the man in the passenger side had to move to the middle. No word spoken apart from the driver asking him where he was going. This didn't strike my father as odd, so he proceeded to sit in silence, not suspecting anything. Suddenly, out of nowhere, one of the guys randomly bursts into laughter. According to my father, this wasn't your ordinary laugh, but something much more diabolical. Sure enough, the driver looks at my father with what he claims was the devil's eyes, now chiming in with the laughter. As you could suspect, they start going a different route. My dad knew they weren't heading anywhere near the desired location. He was trying to play it cool, waiting for his chance. Luckily, a few minutes later, they finally hit a red light. The driver slowly crept his arm across the cab and starts caressing my dad's neck. I guess his fight or flight kicked in, and a surge of adrenaline came about. He unlocked the door and bolted out, not looking back. He said he hid near a local church and watched as they drove around for him. Some years later, my dad was watching the news when the mugshot of the man popped onto the screen. His heart sank. The man was undoubtedly the same one who had picked him up hitchhiking. That man was John Wayne Gacy. When I was about 11 years old, I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with my mother. We were very poor, and the bedroom had double sliding glass doors that led out the balcony. We lived on the 3rd floor for safety and the cheaper rent it offered. My mother often stayed in the living room late into the evening because she liked to watch TV before bed, and I preferred quiet. One night I was up on the top bunk. We had a bunk bed with a full-size mattress on the bottom and a twin on top, and my mum came into the room and called my name quietly. I'm a light sleeper, so woke up. She said, "There's someone on the back porch, don't move." She was standing just outside the doorway to the room and had stopped entering when she saw the shadow of someone behind the blinds covering the glass door. The type of blinds that are flat when closed, but with the lights around the complex, you could see the shadows through them. I just remember being shocked that someone could get up onto a 3rd floor balcony. Then he started knocking really slowly. That's when I got scared. My mum went into the kitchen and dialed 911. I stayed as still as I could, hoping he would just go away. It couldn't have been more than 3 minutes, but the next time I opened my eyes, he was gone. When the police arrived about 3 minutes after, they looked all over the complex but could find no signs of him. When one of the officers went onto our balcony, there was no indication how he'd gotten up onto the 3rd floor, but there were 2 very evident palm prints where he'd leaned against the glass for who knows how long before my mum walked in. It never happened to us again. I hope it didn't happen to anyone else either. Back in the 70s/early 80s, my mother lived in Sydney, Australia. She was in her early 20s at the time, and like most youth in those days, attended a lot of discos. One night, Mum and her female friend had just stepped out of a disco and were about to head home. Mum's friend, however, was heavily intoxicated from all the drinking and could barely walk, so she planned to walk her friend home, then head to her own apartment. They'd hardly walked a few paces before a car pulled up beside them, with 2 young men inside in their late 20s. They wound their windows down and called to the women, offering them a ride. My mum declined and was about to continue walking, but her drunk friend told her she wanted to join the men, and my mum asked if she could accompany her. Now her friend was about to get into a car with 2 strange men, and considering how intoxicated she was, Mum developed a bad feeling letting her friend go alone inside the car with 2 total strangers. She reluctantly agreed. They both got in the car with the men. They told the men where they wanted to be let off, and away they went. As they drove, the men made friendly conversation, and nothing seemed overwhelmingly off for the moment. However, it wasn't long before the conversation started to turn flirtatious, and it soon became clear the men weren't driving them to the location they'd asked for. They had started to head out the city and into the rural suburbs. Mum's friend was so out of it that she was oblivious to this, busy, preoccupied with conversation. By this stage, all of the red flags were going off for my mum, and she wanted to desperately get out of there. Eventually, the men pulled up outside a forest reserve and ordered the women to get out. Now the men's voices were demanding and no longer friendly. Terrified, my mum, who wanted to sprint away, still couldn't bring herself to do so as her drunk friend was being led into the woods. Mum followed until the 2 men attempted to pin them against trees and make advances on them. Now my mum was full-on fight mode and began scratching, punching and kicking at the 2 men who were also fighting back. Her friend, now aware of the horrific ordeal, was also trying to defend herself but was significantly more vulnerable due to her weakened state. Mum eventually managed to injure the man attacking her enough to move on to the other who was attacking her friend. She fought with all her might until they managed to break away, covered with scratches and bruises. The men didn't follow, but hurriedly got into the car and sped away. Mum and her friend ran up to the nearest house, hysterical and bleeding from all the scuffles. They asked the woman living there to call the cops, and she did so promptly, taking my mother and her friend in. Unfortunately, the cops never caught the man, but my mum became far more cautious and aware of her surroundings, and used this story to warn my sister and I. I'm gonna be honest. Men usually never hit on me or approach me at all. This is because I am a very large woman. It is weird when they do. It's only happened twice in the last 6 or 7 years. The first of those times was okay, a little uncomfortable since I was in an elevator with this complete stranger in my apartment building, and he kept asking me out for coffee. I know I'm not attractive, so I never believe people will act like I am. I'm also not looking to date. The second time, however, just happened recently. After work, I took the bus down to the grocery store. It's a few minutes in the opposite direction from my apartment, but they have some pretty good deals, so I like to go at least once per month. As I started walking away from the bulk foods area, this is the only store with sesame glazed cashews, so I was getting some, I heard someone say something like, "Hey." There were other people in the area, so I figured this person was trying to get the attention of a deli or baker employee nearby. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, but paid no attention and walked off to continue my shopping. I had used the phone in the store that automatically rings up the taxi company to call my ride before exiting, and walked off to the side where the benches are to wait for it to arrive. A few people walked behind the bench as they also left. Then one stopped and said, "Hello." I still paid no attention. The only person I talk to besides customers at work is my sister, and she was back in our apartment. He came a little closer, cleared his throat and said, "Excuse me." I turned. It was the guy. It was then I realized he had been trying to get my attention inside the store earlier. "Oh, hello." I smiled. I really am anxious out in public, but I'm decent at faking friendliness. "Do you live round here?" "No, I'm just waiting for my ride home." "Ah, I live over there." He pointed at the townhouse complex across the street. "I can give you a ride if you like." Well, that was fast and forward. "Oh, thanks, that's alright. I already called my ride and it's on its way." "Are you certain that they're coming? Because it's no problem to drive you." I assured him that my ride was on its way, and he kept trying over and over to get me to come with him despite my polite refusals. He offered to put his phone number in my phone so I could call him any time, day or night, and he would come pick me up. Well, that was creepy. I told him the truth and said I didn't have a cell phone. He immediately challenged that by asking how I called for a ride then, and I said there was a phone inside the store that I used. He chuckled and asked, "Are you worried if I give you a ride your husband would kill me?" Husband? Yeah, right. I'm 35 and have never even had a boyfriend. "Oh, he might. He can sometimes get like that. Best if I just take the cab when it arrives," I lied. "Well, you don't have to tell him that I gave you the ride." "That wouldn't be very honest of me. Besides, the folks at the taxi company know who I am, so I can't just no-show." Which is true. I've been a regular for the past 6 years and they know me by voice now. He then asked where I was from, and I said that I was from this general area. He said that he was from Africa. I could tell that already. So I politely asked which country. He told me and then started talking about being from a tribe and how tribes would fight each other for things, mostly about how whichever tribe won, they could marry women from the other tribe and not have to pay for that privilege and whatnot. I was just praying that my cab would come soon. I kept turning to check. When it finally arrived, I stood up and said, "Looks like my ride's here." He said it was nice to talk to me, and as I was putting my bags in the car, I hopped in the cab, thanked the cabbie for finally saving me, and we were off. That guy must have offered me a ride at least a dozen times. But that wasn't the end of it. As I was getting my stuff out the cab once arriving to the complex, as there are multiple buildings and our parking lot sloped down a hill, and I am at the top of the hill, the man drove past me. He didn't live here too. He followed me. I don't know what he hoped to accomplish since the buildings are secured and he doesn't know my first name, let alone my last, which is the only building listed outside the buzzer. I hustle my fat butt into the building and hope I don't meet the guy again. A guy made a Craigslist post saying he was a talent scout and ran an agency. He got the interests of a father, grandfather, and his granddaughter. The guy's speciality was casting families, preferably children, under the guise that he was looking to produce a film and needed actors. Not too long ago, the grandfather and his granddaughter went to meet this guy at the house. They actually drove 2 hours early to check out the house before going in. There was a for sale sign outside the house, and it appeared vacant. The family drove by later at the agreed time of the meeting in the morning, and were greeted at the door by a man in a suit. He tried to convince the little girl to come inside many times. The grandfather got a bad feeling and left. Turns out, in an unrelated sting, the police caught this guy for indecent images of children charges. He had 10 counts, and his home was raided. The father/grandfather around the same time reported this incident to the police. When the police found this guy, he had a bag with him. In it were knife, zip ties, adult toys, and he even had plastic sheeting. He was pretty much going to end the grandfather and then abuse and end the child. His plan was to get this all on film. The camera was set up and ready to go. Luckily, the father and grandfather had a gut feeling something was off and reported the incident. This guy happened to be a kid I pretty much grew up knowing for about 15 years. He was even my brother's roommate for a while. He was always very creepy, and I could never pinpoint why exactly, but I felt my stomach drop reading this news. This guy has been inside my home, went to parties I had like my brother's birthday, and I've had multiple conversations with him. Luckily, he won't be getting out of jail anytime soon. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. Some of them were pretty creepy. I'm also going to let you know that some of the stories have news articles attached to the links. So if there was one story in particular that you're interested in, you can find the links within the links. So yeah, they're pretty disturbing. Yeah, check that out at your own risk as well. I hope you enjoyed the video. Huge thanks as always to my lovely members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing. And if you want to help me out, especially as January is the slowest month of the year for YouTubers, by signing up, that'd be pretty cool. Or sharing my video is also nice. Or just subscribing if you're one of the 74% who aren't subscribed would be great too. Thanks everyone, but for now I'm going to sign off. So stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.